Good morning, everybody. I think that the microphones are on, but it's not a brilliant room in terms of acoustics. So if you at the back cannot hear for any reason during the session, please wave ferociously and we will do our very best to shout louder. I want to welcome all of you to this discussion. My name is Christian, I'm the director of the Centre for Social Justice. So it's a privilege to have you with us this morning for a debate about housing. Before I get on to housing, let me just mention a few housekeeping points. If you want to use Twitter, please do. We're just going with the hashtag, which is Conservative Party Conference. It's CPC, I think, 14. So we're going to contribute to that debate. If you want to use Wi-Fi, the password, I understand, is H-Honours. Don't ask me why it's H-Honours, but it's H-Honours. So you can log into that. And also there are feedback forms on your seats. If you get 30 seconds, I'd be interested to know how you heard about the event. We have teams that are flyering every year, but we never know if they actually reach people or not, or whether you just pick your fringe meetings from the brochure. So that would just be useful intelligence for us. I want to thank Wates Living Space and Orbit Group for hosting and organising this important session. Housing terrifies most politicians. Terrifies most people actually when it comes to the debate about policy, because it's extremely complex. And the old adage that one of the toughest political questions for a member of parliament is rising house prices a good thing? And we get locked into that debate about supply, conditions, planning, prices, interest rates, rental markets, incredibly complicated. But at the Centre for Social Justice, it's so terrifying, the alarm goes off. We'll just check what that is. Right. Only a test, I hope. Anyway, I'll crack on, and if we have to leave, we'll tell you. At the CSJ, we want to look at housing, particularly because we feel it is a social justice matter. And that is because housing conditions and whether you have a roof over your head and whether you live in a safe and secure place or not really matters. Is it
It's fine, it's a test, apparently.
a test? Wonderful. I think I'll just wait until it I think if we could tell them that they've tested it and it's working, that'd be really helpful. So for us, can we come at housing from a social justice perspective? And it's an exciting panel we have here today because we are represented on a number of fronts in respect of that. Delighted in a second to hand over to Brandon Lewis, who is the Member of Parliament for Great Yarmouth, but also the Minister for Housing and Planning. John Glen, PPS to Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government and MP for Salisbury. Paul Tennant, who has one of the best names in housing. You've probably heard that for your entire career. I'm so sorry, I get that a lot.
So it's the last time.
Right. Okay. Paul Tennant, who is the Chief Executive of Orbit Group that we're delighted to be working with today. Come on in, there's room at the back. Right, that is it. Okay, superb. And Andy Hobart, Managing Director of Wates Living Space. And again, thank you for being with us today. We'll hear from each of the panelists who will speak for about 5 minutes. Then we'll open for conversation, because I think these fringe meetings come into their own when actually there's a discussion to be had, questions and reflections from the floor. And we'll aim to be finished by about 11:30. So thank you for being with us, and I'm delighted now to hand over to Brandon, the Minister of State for Housing and Planning.
But not building regulations. So at least the building regulations that Stephen Williams oversees clearly,
Yes.
clearly working here.
Yes.
Well, I mean, the interesting part of the debate, I agree with Christian, is around more when we do the Q&A, and for me, finding out whether John in our department agrees with everything I say or has a different view that we can debate later. I mean, I just thought I'd go along pretty much with what I was asked to talk about, which is really the purpose of social housing. What is it for? Should we and how can we build more? And then what is the role for social housing and increased housing options, helping people with employment and that financial security for the future. And I think having a home that somebody can call their own is absolutely key. Now, what I think is interesting is I think we are moving to a world where the home we call our own is changing. Lifestyle choices, as well as depending on where you live, options of supply are changing. And I think one of the real things we have to remember is what we've traditionally in the past thought about as social housing or just council housing. The offer is changing. There are more and more things and options becoming available for people in terms of what type of property and what type of tenure they want. And we're seeing more mixed options coming onto the market in different areas, whether it is directly council houses themselves, which are growing at the fastest. We've got more council houses built under this government than the entire 13 years of the Labour government, which is something I find surprises people, but we should be very, very proud of as a government. But equally, we're seeing a growth in the shared equity sector, and I think we're at the start of what could be a very large growth over the next few years, particularly in the private rented sector as well. And housing associations are developing more and more, finding ways of developing in really interesting ways. I've seen some developments recently where we have been able to not just create wonderful new homes for people, but actually completely regenerate an area. Developing in some parts, I saw one in London recently, which was 450 homes. Regeneration work there on the same areas is delivering around 750 homes. Regenerated the area, really good quality design, really good quality build, and really creating a community that's moved away from now having the tower blocks that I think the architects in generations past hopefully look back on with some shame, to actually building places people want to live. And I think that's a really important thing we've got to think about, is that as we're developing these different tenures and different options of property tenure, that actually we're building places people want to live and to create a base, because that's what builds a community for the future. Now, in terms of can we build more, I think we certainly all accept that we want to see more properties being built. I actually think there needs to be a really good mix. I think we will see the private rented sector grow, particularly as we get institutional investment starting to grow, including our own potentially local government pension scheme, which can now invest in this and develop it. I think the housing associations are also now using their balance sheets to be able to deliver more and more. We're obviously looking at putting more out there to encourage the growth of both sectors, as well as development, with some of the schemes we've launched over the last couple of days, the extra 100,000 starter homes, and obviously the rent to buy scheme, which we launched on Friday as well. Now, one of the things that councils will often talk about in terms of, and I had this talking to some councils just yesterday, is they want to build more, they want to develop more. With the general power competence, councils can look at their land supply and some of the buildings of own, look whether they can be developing those for revenue, for their own financial benefit, but also providing homes for local residents. One of the things they will often talk about is the HRA cap. We have to look at that and remember that's in the context of there is 2.8 billion of headroom in the HRA cap. Most local authorities are nowhere near the level, but we have also made, for those that are looking at that level, some more borrowing available. We've made some announcements already, and I'll be making some more over the next couple of months about authorities that could go a bit further to deliver more. So for me, it's actually about a mix. And although that sounds like there's lots of bits and pieces going on, I actually think that's a real strength of what the government has done. We've created a menu of options. So if you're on the supply side, as a housing association, as a property developer, somebody interested in PRS, you can look at that menu of options to see what suits your organisation in terms of delivering the properties that you want to deliver. And if you're on the demand side, as somebody, a consumer coming into whether it's a first-time buyer, somebody looking to rent, somebody looking for social or council housing, whatever it is, again, there's a menu of options out there, different types of tenureship and ownership that mean you can look at what is right for you. And we're always looking at how we further extend that menu, and that's what led to us announcing Help to Buy Start Homes from the Prime Minister on Saturday. So I think that's a really strong place to be. We are seeing housing starts now back at the highest level since 2007, but that has got to be the start. We've got a lot more to do. There's a lot of pieces of that jigsaw that have got to come together. It's not just about land supply, and we'll be talking later today about how that land supply has improved dramatically over the last year. You're only going to wait a few more hours for some numbers on that. But actually it's about the speed with which we build, and that is also down to the type of ownership we have in order to deliver those properties quicker than sometimes traditional building does allow. I'm going to stop there. I'm interested to hear what everybody else has to say and talk to you a bit further with questions.
Thank you, Brandon. Please do make the questions, because we'll get through as many as we can after the short speeches. John, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. I know you're working on a huge number of things with Eric over at CLG, and of course you're looking at food poverty too with Frank Field, so it's a privilege to have you with us, and looking forward to your reflections.
Thank you very much, Christian. It's great to be here. I first of all would just like to say that I was...
Could the speakers stand up? It's quite hard to see them in the back.
Sure. I'm always humbled by my stepson's remarks about what the role of PPS is, which is personally picked slave. I regard that as my role, really, and I've served Brandon as well as his PPS effectively, so I obviously defer to him as the expert here, but I would like to make a few observations. What's striking for me, having been the PPS in DCLG for the last 2 years, is our core mission. The first line as you walk into the offices, not the entrance, but when we go into the offices in our scaled down building in the Home Office building, is to provide a home for everyone. And that is our real challenge, and I think as Brandon's set out, that involves a variety of options. And of course it's incredibly complicated to deliver the right option in every part of the country, given the challenges that we've got in terms of house prices, actually sorting out the planning system, which is what we've done, and that's taken a while, and that's been a real obstacle in many respects to opening up the opportunity to have a bigger supply. But I've been involved with some colleagues, and I'm still allowed to do this because I'm not a minister, and we've produced this report with the Relationships Foundation, which looks at sort of social capital, and in that report we've got some, oh thank you, that's better, okay. And in that report we've got some recommendations in the areas of housing, which I shared with the Minister as we walked down here. He says that some of them are okay. But I think there are some changes. I think it's bewildering to many people that the up to 25 billion for 250,000 new homes could be leveraged either through reforms to borrowing restrictions or stock transfer to housing associations. But we don't do that because it would increase the level of our national debt. But I know out there, in terms of actually stimulating a really different scale of building of social housing, that's what we need to do. But I think Brandon's right in that there are significant changes that we brought in that would allow much more house building of social housing, that local authorities aren't always taking up that opportunity. But we need to have a series of incentives in place as well. Obviously the spare room subsidy has provided an interesting debate, but the principle of finding incentives to urge people where it's desirable from their point of view to move out of housing that's no longer appropriate for them, we've got to find appropriate, better housing stock available for people to move into. So we need to work on that one. Shared equity ownership. This is something that I think is practically the way forward for many people. As we all know, certainly in Salisbury, I know the difference between the average household salary and the average house price is enormous, and we're not going to change that overnight. So I think the government's been very wise in trying to encourage different options there. Long-term tenancies are also something that we need to examine and encourage, because I think in many ways that stability is desired both sides of the equation, and we need to look at different categories of tenancies for different age groups where that would be more desirable. Certainly for young families it's something that we feel is really important. But I do think that the government should be commended for what they've done over the last 3 or 4 years in terms of actually having the ability to think creatively, to deliver new sorts of options, and my sense is, talking to constituents, that actually they're pretty pleased with what's happening in the direction of travel. There's a massive debate that needs to be had in this country, and Brandon's predecessor was very good at stimulating it on the front pages of the Telegraph around housing and planning. We need to recognise that there is an enormous shortage of housing in this country, and to deliver that we need to be honest about what it takes. It's going to take a lot more house building, and that fear fills a lot of people with a lot of fear, but unless we do so, we're not going to address this fundamental problem that we don't have enough supply, which is ultimately why the price is so high. The planning reforms we've taken into account will actually deliver a massive step change if we allow it to, but that involves local consent. So I think there's more to be done. Social housing is complicated. We need a variety of options. Many of them are working, and I think there's more progress to be seen in the next few years ahead.
John, thank you very much. The planning debate is fascinating, and I'm on the board of a housing association, and we talk about, of course, the NIMBYs, but not in my backyards, but there's also a big group of notes apparently, which is not over there either. So you get the NIMBYs and the notes, and there's a big restriction on supply, I know. Delighted to be working with Orbit Group. I've known Boris now for a few years, and Paul is with us on the panel today. In my view, Orbit is one of the most progressive and innovative organisations in the housing sector, and do fantastic work, which is why I'm proud that the CSJ works alongside them, to think about what can be done to change lives and improve social mobility through housing, rather than just for people who own housing and collect the rents and produce the bricks and mortar. And so it's exciting for us to be working with Orbit, and Paul has been the group chief executive of Orbit since 2003, and Orbit, my understanding is, manages more than 37,000 homes for more than 10,000 people. So this is a serious organisation in the housing market, working with many people around the UK, and so it's pleasure now to hand over to you, Paul, to hear what you have to say in response to that.
Thank you. Context of today's debate, we do need a range of options, a range of solutions for people going forward. I think we need to be careful that we don't just address aspiration, we need to address need as well. Both are exceptionally important. I think there's a real opportunity for innovation, for new thinking. The sector and the environment is ripe for those type of approaches going forward. I think we also need to have new partnerships within our sector. Bedfellows that organisations would never have worked with before, we need to be moving towards that. Erith Park's a very good example of the work that we're doing with Wates. 650 apartments have been dropped, and we're putting houses back in their place. This point about regeneration communities, improving people's lives, improving the area, absolutely part of our mission as an organisation. But I think it's also about looking at the whole housing market, not just parts of. From Orbit's perspective, the issues we need to address, demand is huge. Whether it be social housing, PRS, part ownership or outright ownership, the demand is enormous, and there's plenty of action for everybody to be involved. What we see as affordability is key in all tenures. It's really important as an affordable product. I would argue the housing market is dysfunctional, both in terms of availability and affordability, and there's too few homes being built. That's the bottom line in terms of what we need going forward. And also, I think one of the key things we need to move on, one of the issues, is drawing in investment, particularly institutional investment. We don't get great deal of institutional investment. There's an awful lot of money slushing around. We need to make sure our product and our offer is acceptable and attractive. What we've been doing to tackle this ourselves, which is one of the questions I was asked to address, we're going to double our own home production over the next 3, 4, 5 years as an organisation, provide 12,000 homes by 2020. We're going to use grant, rent and borrowing to ensure that we develop our cross-subsidy model, which is what we operate, to make sure we make full use of our own resources. And our borrowings as an organisation will hit £1.6 billion within the next 4 years. So sweating our assets, absolutely. We will provide a flexible housing journey for people, that range of products. What we want to do is to make sure we have something that's affordable. Whatever you can afford, we will address your need as a person, as an individual, rather than giving you fixed tenure options. There's much more flexibility going forward. And we'd heavily promote shared ownership as a mainstream, not necessarily shared equity, shared ownership itself, because the shared ownership product in our view is more flexible, it meets people's requirements much more effectively and is more affordable for individuals. And I think importantly, going back to this point about mobility, the ability for people to move around the country and trade shared ownership properly needs to be developed as a market. We know Rightmove are interested in doing that. We need to develop that as a very strong product range going forward. I think what we've learned is that organisations do need to change. I think we've always seen ourselves as one of the most effective public-private partnerships as organisations. I think we've lost that message. It's really important to seem to be part of a solution that works with the private sector very effectively. Our cultures have changed, our organisations will deliver increasing solutions and innovation to make it happen, which the Minister's touched on. And I think the policy solution for us, shared ownership. It's a very effective way of giving people solutions and options, making it affordable for them. And I suppose my only plea would be to invest in housing associations, because the business model, if we don't, I think is a huge loss to the country, because we can leverage assets, we can make best use of resources, and certainly we're happy to work with other organisations, because we see our role about health, about housing, about jobs, about training, and about the economy, and we can contribute to all of the above. Thank you.
Can I just say, this is the most efficient fringe meeting I've ever done. The speakers are actually keeping to time. It's remarkable. Right, over to the final of our speakers, and then we'll have questions. Andy, it's good to have you with us. Andy is the managing director of Wates Living Space, and has been since December 2012. And what impresses us about the work that Wates Living Space is doing is that it's committed, as it says, to ploughing a lot of the money it spends back into local communities. And I think you talk about being more than a contractor, and that again impresses us and matters to us, because it's about people ultimately. You know, that is what we're talking about, and providing people with homes and places to live. So thank you for being with us, and no pressure, but you have a very efficient act to follow. So
all right,
stick to time.
so my 5 minutes. Let me just tell you a little bit about Wates to start with, because I think it's relevant and it gives us, I think, quite a unique view on the housing market. The first thing is we're a family business. Started in the housing business 115 years ago, the fourth generation of the Wates family that are the shareholder of the business today. That brings with it a couple of things. In terms of the range of things we do, I run a business. My clients are all local authorities and housing associations. Our original start in life was very much as a contractor, building affordable housing and also maintaining affordable housing. But we also have a business that is in the development space, that acquires private sector land, takes it through planning consent. We're building at Greenwich Peninsula a major contracting project, delivering some of the big residential schemes that are going on in London as well. And wrapped around all of that is part of the family DNA, is the community investment, this real desire to give something back to the local communities. And believe me, that is one of the most interesting parts of our employee proposition that gets people to come and work for us, should not be forgotten. For me, there are sort of a number of key themes in a market that is sort of profoundly dislocated, I think, in terms of its structure. The first is we absolutely support the concept of housing as infrastructure. Housing as a platform for economic and social development, not an outcome of economic and social development, like roads, like utilities, and therefore it demands a long-term plan, a multi-party approach and a consistency over many, many years to really make a difference in the situation we've got. Secondly, of course, one has to talk about planning and land, and we think some of the moves recently around the NPP app have been really positive. We've got to keep going down that road, speed up the planning process, bring public sector land to market more quickly. We do have to grapple with this thorny issue of the green belt. We don't need to take all the green belt on, but we do need to deal with that. And I think overall, we've started to create a position where the local authorities can begin to conceive of some local ownership and ambitious plans. And we absolutely need that local agenda, in my view, to continue. HRA reform is a really positive step, but the capability doesn't exist in local authorities today necessarily to really take the housing challenge and opportunity on. And we in the private sector have to help with that. Funding, look, I'm afraid that the market alone will not deal with the challenge of pure affordability, or indeed, in our experience, the challenge around PRS. So we have to really think about how that gets built into perhaps strategic housing plans for areas around mixed tenures. And then finally, and probably the biggest challenge, is actually around hearts and minds. How do we create a positive community response to housing and the infrastructure benefits of that, rather than all the challenges that go with us? Because that is one of the challenges for local politicians when they are pushing through their housing plans, is how do they deal with the local community and what that means when they need to be re-elected in a few years' time. We've really got to grapple with that issue, that people see this as a positive. I mean, we're doing a number of things at our level to deal with this. One of them is we're putting out there some very different sort of deals and structures in order to get housing built. In Aylesbury, we're in a joint venture with the HCA to get housing built, taking something that would not have been viable up front and increasing the potential land receipt to the HCA as a result of that. We're the delivery partner and very proud to be in Manchester for Matrix Homes. That's the joint venture between Manchester City Council and the pension plan that's using funding from the pension to build housing in that particular area. A really innovative structure, and one that we know that other local authorities are looking at. We are putting our own money into developments and not acting merely as a contractor. Paul has talked about the work that we're doing together at Erith Park and the investment that we are making alongside Orbit in that. And finally, another piece of work we've done recently, because we opened up with the concept of social justice and social value. We did a piece of research recently across 200 housing organisations, housing associations and local authorities, talking about what's been the impact of taking the concept of social value into those organisations. And we were really pleased and surprised with the response. It's something we did with PwC and with Orbit and with the Chartered Institute of Housing. 50% said it actually led to reduced costs. 70% said as a result the services that were delivered to their residents were improved. And finally, to Paul's point, partnerships were central to this. Partnerships between the third sector and local government, partnerships between the private sector, and bringing those partnerships together into different models. And that was actually helping those organisations think differently about their role and causing them to challenge the way that local government operates in delivering some of these services. So there's lots to be done. We're doing our own bit in our own way, and we're very privileged to be part of this particular journey around housing in the UK.